Here we go again. I'm making another video related to the protests and riots. Cool. And by the way, any commenter who cares about property over the lives and liberation of marginalized people in this country, by all means, keep revealing yourselves, because I had a ton of fun blocking a lot of fucking idiots who thought that the last time I made a video about this subject. Anyway, recently there's been an uptick in demand to remove statues commemorating very racist and horrible people in history, like Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, Christopher Columbus, figures like those who have statues commemorating them. Many of these statues have been defaced and destroyed by the public, and I love it so much, because why the fuck in the year 2020 we still have statues commemorating horrible figures like these? People who fought for the Confederacy, people who kick-started genocide. We still have Andrew Jackson on all of our $20 bills, the guy who kind of sort of kick-started the genocide on indigenous people in this country. Why exactly should we continue to commemorate figures like those and have statues dedicated to those kind of figures and have figures like those on our on our dollar bills? It kind of sort of holds some kind of reverence for these kind of figures and kind of tells the public, yeah, these are figures that you should hold some kind of reverence for, because when you have statues commemorating certain types of figures, it kind of sort of puts them on some kind of pedestal and kind of tells the public that they should hold some kind of reverence for these kind of figures. And I know conservatives have been freaking out and saying, oh, the liberals want these statues destroyed and taken down because they want to erase history. Many of these statues have been built many years after these people's deaths, like the Robert E. Lee statue. It was built 70 years after his death. I know it was built sometime in the 20s. In those 70-something years following his death, he was still noteworthy enough to make a statue of. It's not like immediately after his death he was magically forgotten because he didn't have some kind of monument built after him. He's still the Civil War is still frequently taught in many history classes in this country. We still learn about Christopher Columbus. We get a false sense of history about Christopher Columbus because he's still painted as some kind of hero that discovered America, when in reality that's not even historically accurate, but yet many schools in this country love to teach history like that. That's how I learned about Christopher Columbus when I was little. And we still learn about the slave trade. There's many statues commemorating slave traders in this country as well. We still learn about all of this, so these figures won't be forgotten just because a statue of theirs is torn down. If anything, having statues commemorating figures like these gives a false impression of history, like I mentioned just a minute earlier, because having statues of figures like these plants the idea in many people's heads that these figures were noteworthy enough to have statues built after them. They must have done something that deserved having a statue built after them. They must have been good people to have statues built after them. So really, these statues are harmful to the perception of, historical events, and gives a sense of validity to what these people have done and what these people have stood for. All those Confederate figures who have statues built after them in this country, they kind of sort of fought to keep their slaves, to keep the right to own a slave alive in this country, and they were willing to die for said right, and wanted to secede from this country to preserve that right, because they wanted to keep their slaves, because they were racist fucking evil pricks. So these are the kind of figures that these statues help commemorate. So why exactly should we keep these statues, really? And I know some people might say, well, is it really that hard to ignore these statues? I mean, and for some viewers who may live by these statues, you might say, well, I live near these statues, and whenever I go to the parks that have these statues, I just ignore them, and many other people ignore them. Well, it's kind of not that easy for some people. There are many people living today who would have been slaves or would have been genocided by these very same people that these statues were built after, had they lived during those times. So it's kind of not that easy. It's kind of not so easy to just forget that these statues exist and to kind of just ignore the existence of these statues that kind of commemorate the times of when people were enslaved and when mass genocide was committed. It kind of gives credence to these kind of actions. It kind of says, hey, if you were an evil fuck who did things like this, we'll build a statue after you and commemorate you because what you did was so noble and brave. I mean, you were a brave soldier fighting for the right to continue to keep slavery alive in this country. So that makes you noteworthy enough to build a statue after you. That's kind of the impression that these statues give a lot of people, and that's kind of sort of why a lot of people want these statues to be taken down and are starting to take matter into their own hands and destroying these statues themselves. So when you rattle on about history, think about how that history affects people to this day. especially those who would have been at the receiving end of these horrible acts committed in history had they been alive during those times. These are statues commemorating the very figures who were responsible for making systemic racism the huge issue it is today, and that's kind of sort of why people are going after these statues, and that's kind of sort of why people want these statues destroyed and taken down, and again, are destroying the statues themselves, because this is the issue that they are going after. This is the issue behind the reason why they want these statues taken down. It's not to, again, erase history or erase any memory of these kind of people. No, I'm sure all these people are fine with the fact that these people are taught in classes, as long as they're not glorified in any sort of way. Teach history the way it went down, and don't put them on any kind of pedestal, like, I don't know, building a statue after these kind of figures, because that's kind of a way to say, what these people did was cool. What these people did is worthy of reverence, and to put in high regard. And let me be brutally honest here, I think a lot of these people who whine on and on about history and use history as a justification to keep these racist statues up, use that as a shield to hide the fact that they really do like these figures. They like what these figures did, and they fully support them, and just don't want to admit it because, of course, they would face a lot of scrutiny if they did come out and say, well, these figures are cool, I like them, I like the fact that they have a statue commemorating what they did, because I support what they did. And again, I think it's just a way for them to hide their own bigotry, which they're not even good at doing in the first place, so, yeah. Anyway, I fully support these statues getting destroyed and defaced, and I love that political officials are finally starting to cave in and are finally agreeing to take down these statues, and I still think the protests and riots are based. If you don't like that, kiss my ass. That's all I have to say. Bye-bye.